Hello and welcome everyone to another ADS webinar session. This is also actually our last webinar session for the year, and we're ending on a good note, I guess. So today we will be looking at data science for good. We will be joined by Andrew and Paul and our moderator, Emma. But before we start with this webinar, I would like to introduce myself as well as Amsterdam Data Science to give you all a little bit more insight as to what we do. So I'm Anita, and I work for Amsterdam Data Science. And Amsterdam Data Science is essentially a network organization that seeks to improve and foster the artificial intelligence and data science ecosystem here in Amsterdam. And we do that by organizing events and webinars such as these to give people more insight and knowledge into the world of, or into the field of data science and artificial intelligence. What I'd like to do now is I'm going to poll the audience and to give you an understanding as to why we do that. We want to ensure that we provide webinars such as these that are tailored to our audience. So by completing this poll, we'll have an idea of who our audience is. So I'm just going to launch that right now, and please take the time to fill that in. So without any further ado, I'd like to give the floor to our moderator today, which is Emma, and I'm going to allow her to introduce herself and to introduce the speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you for avoiding to pronounce my family name. So I'm Emma Beauxis Aussalet, it's a French name. And now currently I work at VU University as an assistant professor of ethical computing. So that's one more reason that I'm even more interested in this field. And my role today is to facilitate the question answering. So I'll be looking very carefully at the questions that you post. And please, for that, you should use the Q&A facility. So at the bottom of the screen, you could see it on the extreme right, the Q&A button. So please use that and not the chat. Because in the chat, we might not answer your questions and it might disturb our speakers because it always blinks with a red button. And yes, so I look forward to this session, and I'm looking forward also to your questions. And our first speaker for today is Andrew Sutjahjo. Andrew has an interesting profile because he studied neuroscience, and he also had initiative on its own to do good for the world. I'll let him introduce that later, you will see. But then he managed to merge his technical knowledge about data and data science to do good for the world. So without further ado, let's welcome Andrew, that currently works for Correlaid NL. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks, Emma, and very well done on my family name, very well pronounced. So as Emma said, I'm Andrew from Correlaid Netherlands. Today I'll be guiding you through a quick overview of what Correlaid is, what we're doing, where we are, how our projects work, and a deep dive into one of our projects that we're currently working on called Beauxis. So first, introduction of who I am. As Emma said, I used to be in neuroscience. I then started an NGO where I tried to build an orphanage. After 2 years, that unfortunately failed. I became a data science consultant for Capgemini, then over to a scale-up called United Wardrobe and a startup called Utelly, and then turned to do freelance. All of this in search and recommendations. Now, the reason that I turned to freelance is I wanted some extra time because I've been searching for better ways to do good than starting an orphanage. And I found that in Correlaid. So the main reason that Correlaid exists is that big tech does a lot with data. And not only do they do a lot with data, they publish it into open source. So this can be the models that Google or whoever publishes that you can freely download, or open source packages which are free to pull. However, the people that could benefit the most of this to do good, the NGOs, they lack the skills to make use of the tools out there. That's why we exist. So we connect data scientists with NGOs for data science projects, all in the name to democratize data science. How we work, we have a core team which facilitates making the projects, running the community, and making workshops and events to connect data scientists and NGOs, all in contact with the network of actual data scientists, but also project managers and facilitators. Quick overview of how we started. About 2.5 years ago, someone from the German Correlaid came over to the Netherlands to do a PhD. Together with them, we started up as just a side project. However, 1.5 years later, it grew so much that we officially founded Stichting Correlaid Netherlands on the 13th of January this year. It's not just us three in the core team, but we have 9 core team members. Everyone has their own field of expertise and helps where they can. One of the things that we have are the usuals, the website. We're on all social media platforms, and we have a Slack where we hang out, but also collaborate on the projects that we actually run. So what do our events look like? One of the ones that we're proudest of is the hackathon back in February, on the name of building a community while also helping out projects that are for good. So we cooperated with CarePay, 510 Global from the Red Cross, and Farm Access Foundation. The things that we tackled were, we were predicting dengue epidemics in the Philippines using geospatial data and ovitraps, how to prevent medical fraud in Kenya, and how to reduce death among pregnant women in sub-Saharan Africa. It was a great turnout. It's about 50 people, pre-corona, as you can see. But it was a good start of building a community, as well as providing interesting outcomes for the NGOs involved. Quick overview of our numbers. Right now we have 90 people on the Slack, 160 people on the newsletter, 9 people in the core team. Of course, we're part of a bigger organization. So the EU, especially Germany, has over 800 on Slack, 1,700 on the newsletter, and 40 people in their core team. We haven't been standing still. So one of the things that we're organizing soon is the data dialogue on environmental NGOs. In this case, we're tackling Ocean Now, who's aiming to reduce microplastics in the ocean. And what we'll be doing is quickly crowdsourcing the scoping of a project for reducing microplastics. This will be on the 1st of December, and if you're interested, I can send you the link. The projects that we've run so far, here's a big screen of all the projects. They range from relatively simple EDA's for Veilig Verkeer Nederland, where we're figuring out how well people know traffic rules and how if they abide by them, to the more statistical with Dance for Life, which is a randomized controlled trial for sexual healthcare interventions, which they've run in 30 schools in Indonesia. It's about condom usage and safe sex. And we're figuring out how well kids are learning about this. We also do the more advanced analytics things with Gmoji, but I'll talk about that later. So one thing that you might be asking yourself is, how do we scope these projects? When it comes to data science, one option would be to say, hey, here's a huge list of all the things we can do. Dear NGO, would you like any of this? We tried that at the start. Turns out it doesn't work, and we've stopped doing this. And the main reason that we've stopped doing this is the NGOs that we talk to are either overhyped on data science or completely unknowledgeable about data science. We see that some of them believe everything can be automatically done, even and especially when they don't have any data themselves, or they just don't know any of the possibilities that are possible with data science. So the things that we do is we engage in conversation with these NGOs, and we at first educate them on possibilities. We do that by going over old projects and showing them what we're capable of and what data science in and of itself is capable of. And then we have a conversation about their problems. Now, the big milestones that we try to hit is identifying a gap within the NGO's knowledge, often in the form of, hey, we don't know X. Once we've figured out that they don't know X, we try to reflect a hunch or hypothesis about that X. And most importantly for us is if they know X, they can do Y. So if they know this thing, they can be helped further either in running their business or some other way. Once we know what's needed, we find the requirements for finding that X and meeting those requirements, preferably in the easiest solutions possible, because what we do is all volunteering and time is, we don't have all the time in the world. This sounds very abstract, and that's because it is, and every use case is different. So what I'd like to do is take you with me in how we scoped a certain project and deep dive through where we are right now. First, some statistics, descriptive, not inference. Mental health is a big problem in the Netherlands, especially among youngsters. And Gmoji is trying to change that, trying to help that. It's a project spearheaded by Garage 2020, which is funded by lots of youth care NGOs and backed by the University of Amsterdam for their research. It's a research app which has a couple of pilot studies. And what they're trying to do is give youngsters better insights in their own emotions, preferably in an attractive and personalized manner, all in the name of preventing more severe mental problems while in their youth care system. So this is what the app looks like. And the basic design principle is, instead of making many questions and having kids fill in long form answers, all they're asking is one daily question, and that is, how are you feeling today? And please tap the emoji that best fits your day today. The reason that they're doing this is there's a huge drop off when using long form answers. You can imagine that if some app is asking you to write a diary once a day, not a lot of people will keep on doing it. One of the things that they were already able to do with just this is have an attractive report on how people were feeling for the past month. That's not where it stops. So behind the screens, passive mobile phone data is being pulled, data during positive emoji days, data during negative emoji days, and their eventual goal is to predict how kids were feeling without input from the youngsters themselves. That way they don't have a drop-off. If that's possible and they see a trend in how kids are feeling, they can use that to figure out which youngsters need an intervention and eventually what kind of intervention would work the best. So that was the state they were in when we talked with them. So the scoping process. we identify a gap. In this case, they didn't know if predicting negative emojis is possible with just mobile phone data. Their hypothesis is passive mobile phone data is enough to predict emojis. And the business value is if they're able to predict emojis, they can ramp up trials for adding interventions. Because as you can imagine, doing clinical trials with at-risk youth is protected and protected for a good reason. So if they know they can predict emojis, they can ramp it up on a general population and then switch over to a clinical population. Not just that, but a scientific research on models of well-being. They can be helped by figuring out how a model predicts emojis and well-being as a way to further that scientific research. Quick overview of the data that's available. It's passive mobile phone data, but it's not as private data as you'd expect. There's no actual messages that are being read. It's more on the lines of which apps were used, how long, and accelerometer data, data usage, and how long something has been on. So once we've scoped all of this, we figure out what the goal is, we figure out what data we have, and how we can benefit this NGO. What happens then is we send out a project announcement to our mailing list saying, hey, dear network, this is the project, this is the scope, this is what we need, these are the skills that you could possibly use or learn. Who would like to donate their time, usually 4 hours a week, around 2 to 5 months on average. Who would like to donate their time? It's either data science or managing the project. One thing to note is we're a volunteer organization. That means for every volunteer, life comes first, then work. And if you have time left, then you can volunteer that time. We've built in redundancy so that if we scope a project saying this is probably 2 people's worth of work, we say we would like 4 data scientists so that if there's a drop off, the project still continues and no one has to feel bad that life takes priority. So the deep dive, we built some features based on desk research on what's important for well-being. Things that we've encountered in research is sleep times and duration is important, how much physical activity is important, how much kids use their phone at night could have a negative impact, time spent outside positive, and the distribution in times of app usage, whether they're social or non-social, single player or multiplayer when it comes to games, could all have effects. One thing that was important for this specific project is it's an application which eventually will be used for ongoing research and will need daily updates. So we needed to make it software and not a one-off analysis. So this is a Python package for the cleaning, training, and selection. We still have until the end of December to finish it. But for now, the initial classifier accuracy is above coin flip. It's not exactly where we want it yet, but we know roughly why. Usual data science packages assume that each row and measurement, in this case, an emoji and the daily phone data, is independent of each other. For us, it's not. It's a time series. So the things that we're still going to be doing is framing them as a time series classification problem. SQTime, if you haven't used it yet, it's very interesting. And because it's important for them to know why the model works and how the model works, we also need to productionize SHAP and LIME. The impact as of today, because we have been doing this project for a while. This week, a new research trajectory has been started by the UvA steered by the results of our initial Lime report. And we're currently in talks with other parties for adding interventions to get to a general population so we can develop the actual intervention and the model for that intervention. So I hope you enjoyed the deep dive. If you're interested in more, if you want to join either as scoping projects, as a data scientist, or as a project manager, I'll send a link in the chat. For now, are there any other questions?
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's a very interesting and inspiring talk. Well, there is already a question from Linda. Thank you very much. It's about how do you select the NGOs you would work with? Is there a criteria regarding religious background, for instance, or other form of political propaganda, or other ethical issues that might arise by using AI in their context?
Ooh, that's a big question. Of course, there are. We've had the luxury that a lot of NGOs, so we have the German Correlaid that already went before us. So we have a little bit of branding. So a couple of NGOs come to us. In that case, we take them on at a case-by-case basis. Does this do good? Can we quickly scope out a project where data science would help in a short period of time? But again, that is on a case-by-case basis. For now, we definitely don't go towards religious setting boundaries on religious entities. As long as they do good, they do good. For the other half of the projects, we, in and of ourselves, as a core team, figure out what are issues that affect us the most. And for us, it's the environment and the disadvantaged people. So whenever we contact other NGOs by ourselves, we usually focus on those. Does that answer your question?
Let's see if Linda has more follow-up questions, but in the meantime, we had two more questions. So one from Marlene, she asked, what is the time frame when you start to working with a new NGO? How long does it take until you get the first dialogue and you start to build the literacy maybe, or unhype the AI until having the scope for a first project?
That depends, which is the best, the most common consultant answer you can get. It all depends. For Garage 2020, this Gmoji project, they were relatively well versed in the what data science can bring to them. So that was, we had a talk, I heard about them 1 week. We had a cup of coffee the next week. We did a scoping session 1 week after, and then sent out the project announcement the week after that. So turnaround time of 3 weeks, and then started it 2 weeks later, while giving time for the applicants to apply. With some other projects, so right now the one with Masterpiece, I started scoping that one with Masterpiece around May, June. That's when we first had contact. And it became a huge back and forth for not just educating, but really getting the scope right in figuring out what the best project is that data science can help them with, that they also have data on. So that that got started 1 week ago. So it depends, anywhere between 3 weeks and months.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that's not surprising. Some might be less obvious than others. There's also another question from Sheng. They ask, like, what kind of cooperation you might do on a scientific level in terms of scientific publication. And I'd like also to extend that topic into what do you publish about those projects for the general public or for other organizations. So it seems that you publish your code open source, which seems like extremely good. And also, how can you comment and discuss how to reuse those projects, the limitations, or the new insights that you got in those problems?
Oof, big question. So for the Jumoji project, it's more cooperation where we feed researchers information about how we made our models and also how the model makes decisions. And that then becomes a discussion on how they can further their research. One other scoping that we've done, but unfortunately didn't turn into a project, is more along the lines of citizen research. As a person who suffered cluster headaches, I'm not sure if you know, but it's called the suicide headache because it's that bad. Thankfully, but unfortunately, not a lot of people have it, which is good in and of itself, but it also means that there's not a lot of research about cluster headaches. So in that case, so a lot of our volunteers, there's about a 50-50 split of students and PhDs and people in working life. So this was a project more for the PhD students in educating him on how to set up a research project. Limitations of open source. Yeah, that's a good question. There's a couple.
Sorry to interrupt, but there's also a question that has a lot of interest about also who owns the intellectual property of the data or the software. And that's related.
So that's something that we negotiate with the NGO. If it's really tightly coupled to the data itself, we might consider closed sourcing it. Otherwise, we highly recommend doing an open source license with them having the intellectual property.
Thank you. So there is a question about on a high level, and I think that would be the last questions because we have a speaker coming up afterwards. But Andrew, you're welcome to answer the questions directly in the Q&A box. So the question is like, what is a higher level visions of the challenges that Correlaid should focus on a domestic or international level?
Sorry, once more. What are the high level?
So, what is the vision of Correlaid on the type of challenges that, as this kind of organization, you should focus on, either on a domestic or global level, or maybe also on the issues with data privacy or the unintended consequences of AI?
Yeah, so our high level strategy is we believe environmental issues are big, and there's a lot of things you can do with data science on these environmental issues. That's also one of the reasons why we're having an environmental data dialogue soon, as well as why the next project we're scoping is an environmental one. As to data privacy, GDPR, it's a very good thing that it's there. So we do our best to educate NGOs on that. It's also something not a lot of NGOs think about. So it's work that is necessary. Yeah, in the end, it's for us, it's all about we see how much data science can benefit the world, and the ones that can benefit the most of it to do more good don't realize it yet. So again, that's the main reason we exist, and the one thing that we'll be fighting for.
Okay, I can see that developing the AI and data literacy is at the root of answering this kind of question. Thank you very much, Andrew. It was really, really interesting. Lots of insights to take home. And now I don't want to take time off our next speaker, so I'm not going to wait any further longer to introduce you to Paul van der Bohr. So Paul, you have a background that is also very technical. You studied aerospace at Delft and engineering at Carnegie Mellon. And you also are a senior director of data science. And you are in the board of Data Science for Social Good. And it's this organization you had experience working with more than 70 organizations. So welcome, and we look forward to you sharing your experience.
Great, thanks Emma for having me, and great to be with you today. So I'm trying to share my screen, and it's telling me it's sharing. So can you confirm that's the case?
Yes, we do see that the screen sharing has started, and now we see it very well. Perfect.
Great. All right. Well, hey, nice to meet all of you somewhat virtually. I wish this was more of a bi-directional conversation than it can be with in the world we live in right now. But in any case, look forward to the questions. I see that you've been engaged already, so I'm going to try and spend enough time on that in the end. But what I'm here to talk to you about briefly is the Data Science for Social Good Foundation, which has been around for many years now. And I've been involved in that in various roles, and maybe to first share with you how I ended up, spending time with them. So my background, as Emma mentioned, is indeed technical. Started with aerospace engineering, spent some time working in industry, then went to do some academic work through a PhD in the United States, and then spent some time back in industry doing actually data science work, mostly at McKinsey with various of McKinsey's clients. And during that entire time, actually since my PhD, I was involved with data science for social good in various ways. Initially, running some of the projects, bringing the foundation to Europe. And since then I've taken up a role at the board of the foundation, and during my day job, let's say, or most of my day job, I also lead an AI team at Beauxis. So Beauxis is a large tech company based out of Amsterdam that has food delivery businesses and secondhand marketplaces and such things. So that's sort of my background, and what I'm going to spend most of the time talking about is what we try to do at Data Science for Social Good, and in particular, the lessons we've learned in trying to do that work. So, our mission, as it's written here, is essentially, at the highest level, to foster the use of data science for positive social impact. And I think that there's many of us trying to do that. The way we actually try to implement this is primarily through training and education, but we also provide direct support. So all of the education that we do is sort of build or learn by building, as we call it. So you work with real data, with real partners to help them with a real problem. And along the way, we've discovered that to do this kind of work, when we started 7 years ago, there was very little in terms of tools and even just general approaches to applying data science for these kinds of societal problems, which I think generally have been underserved when it comes to this kind of technology, right? So a lot of the data science, as is obvious to most, is actually used in a commercial setting, with a lot of the tech companies and increasingly other companies being able to get this kind of talent, while a lot of the public institutions, NGOs, government agencies, local governments have not had access to this kind of talent. So the mission was really to make sure that these kinds of social good agencies or organizations get access to data scientists, and we do that through training, but also by working with them directly. And so we have in the past couple of years have built up a rather big community of volunteers, of alumni that have gone through our fellowship programs, which I'll talk about in a second. We've helped a whole range of nonprofits in all different areas. We've worked with national governments, agencies such as the White House, multilateral agencies like the UN and the World Bank, but also small city governments like Gemeente Rotterdam. For those of you that are based out of the Netherlands, we worked with Rijkswaterstaat. We've worked with educational districts in the United States. We've worked with NGOs in different parts of the world and Africa, working on legal support. And through that range of project partners that we worked with, have learned all sorts of things about what it takes to do this kind of work well. And then that's something I want to spend a couple of minutes on in this presentation as well. But I also wanted to talk to you about how we do this work and where these lessons have come from. So as I mentioned, we focus on education. We started with a fellowship. Actually, that's how Data Science for Social Good started originally. So Raid Ghani, who's the founder of the organization and is also on the board with me today still, he used to be the chief data scientist for the Obama 2012 campaign. And when that was over, he started Data Science for Social Good with the objective of taking these kinds of skills to the organizations that we talked about. That fellowship is still our flagship educational program. We recently launched a Solve for Good, what we call Solve for Good platform, which is basically an online community of volunteers, or an online platform that matches a community of volunteers to social good organizations. And we started a global network of chapters that we call DSSGX, with chapters all over the world. We've got the DSSGX Berlin, we've got DSSGX Iberia. I'm working hard to get DSSGX Netherlands or Amsterdam. So if any of you are interested in doing that, as my last name betrays, I am Dutch. Didn't grow up here, but I am Dutch. So I'm always keen to sort of make sure that we cover the Dutch area, let's say, in the various activities that we do. So just to spend a couple of minutes on the fellowship, because I think this is, as I mentioned, is the flagship program where where it all started and where we still spend a lot of time. So this is a program that's 3 months, full time. We get applicants from all over the world. Typically, 1,000 or more people apply for anywhere between 30 and 45 spots. Depends on the funding that we have available. And we invite those fellows that get chosen to be a part of the program to come to the place where we started in Chicago. We then went to London, to Portugal, or now at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. And we invite them to come and spend summer working with us and learning how to do data science for social good. And so it's quite of an intense program. It's full time, as I mentioned. You get paired with 3 other fellows and a partner organization that then that you then work with for an entire summer to help them understand the problem, go and visit them and understand how they do their work, and then develop a machine learning model that can hopefully improve the work that they're doing, and therefore improve the lives of their direct beneficiaries. So that's the fellowship, and it started in Chicago, as I mentioned. We've expanded over time to Europe, working with partner universities, with the Alan Turing Institute, with Imperial College, with others that have basically are running now versions of this program over the summer. As I mentioned, a consequence of doing this work is that we realized there weren't a lot of tools available to actually apply data science for social good. There's no shortage of tools that can help you do churn prediction really well. But we found there isn't actually sufficient tools to help you, for example, measure fairness. And so one of the things that we did is started developing some of these tools, where Equitas, the one that I'm showing you here, is available open source online as an example of one of these tools that we built, where you can essentially, look at how fair and biased your model is against certain criteria. And we've done more of this kind of work where, we try to not just, do training programs, but also help build specific tools that others can use and consume for their kind of work. And an example of how this one is used is, if you have a machine learning model, you can imagine that it always has errors. No model is perfect. So it tries to figure out what are the costs of a false positive or false negative in certain contexts. Are those false positive rates and false negative rates, equally distributed across, the different groups that you might care about? So, if you have, higher or low income groups in your population, you want to make sure that, the opportunity that they have to get access to certain government services is equally distributed, and the model doesn't make disproportionate mistakes across different parts of these groups. So, that's an example of how Equitest can be used. We spent quite a bit of time thinking about what the kinds of tools are that people like, hopefully you guys need and want to use to do this kind of work. As I mentioned, we launched the Solve for Good, which is the platform that I mentioned that couples or basically connects volunteers with partner organizations. We've discovered over the years that we can't help all of the organizations ourselves directly with the team that we have. So we created this platform to help connect people to organizations, and that's something that we started this summer. We're still building out the platform, making sure it's doing everything that the partner organizations want in terms of connecting them to reliable volunteers. As Andrew mentioned, volunteers have a life and often have a job that come first. So you need to manage a little bit how you couple and match volunteers to the expectations of the project partners in terms of the projects that they or problems that they want solved on the platform like ours. So I promised I'd talk a little bit about the lessons that we learned, and I just put here a couple of the logos of the organizations that we worked with, and as you can see, they span a pretty broad range of topics, all the way from law enforcement, with working with various police departments here to help them understand for example, what's the likelihood of an adverse interaction, which is basically a term that the police departments use for example, use of excessive force of a police officer or other kinds of things that happen. How can you predict situations in which there will be an adverse interaction with a citizen? We worked with public transportation authorities. We worked with educational districts in the United States to help them figure out which students they should prioritize for extra support and schooling. But we also worked with organizations like Sanergy, with the bottom right, which is an organization funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to help basically improve sanitary facilities in slums in Kenya. And one of the challenges that they have is that they build toilets for in the slums, and then they empty these toilets, and then the waste that's collected in these toilets is used as a fertilizer, right? So but they have a whole logistics operation set up to empty these toilets, and you can imagine that with machine learning you can actually predict when a toilet is going to be full and when you should send somebody to collect it, so that you can basically service more toilets with a relatively smaller logistics operation. But we also worked with environmental enforcement departments like the EPA department in New York State and in Illinois. We worked with the government of Mexico on citizen engagement. So this is the government of Mexico basically has a digital platform where citizens can ask any question that is officially directed to the presidency, to the president. And through constitutional right, Mexicans then have a right to an answer within a certain number of days. And that used to be obviously through mail, now through digital platform. You can imagine the volume of requests that end up coming to the president go up. So we help them understand and route some of these requests. So people ask all sorts of things like, hey, I want to know how I can get a scholarship for my teenage daughter. What are the options available? Or people ask for help on, legal support, like, hey, the mayor of my city unlawfully, took away my piece of land after a divorce. How can I get support? And so these are all the different kinds of requests to helping the government sort of route them to the correct agency that then gives the right help and support to the people that actually submitted these requests. So you can see that it's quite a kind of a broad range of topics, from large organizations to small ones. With the World Bank, we worked on understanding which tenders might be at risk of collusion and corruption. With the Ministry of Rijkswaterstaat, we worked on figuring out how they can optimize the allocation of their road inspectors for accidents in the case of road incidents. And what we found is that, you know, in doing this kind of work, there's a couple of things that stand out. And I think Andrew mentioned this, right? So a lot of these NGOs, when we enter in conversation with them initially, they don't exactly know what AI can do for them. And it's either they have a super, you know, lofty idea AI could solve everything, or they just have a misconception of what it can do, general misconception. And so we spend a lot of time at the beginning scoping projects. And that's true for the platform, the Solve for Good platform, and for other projects that we do with these organizations. So spending, you know, enough time helping them frame the problem in the right way. You know, the saying goes, you know, asking the right question is half the answer. I think that's the case here as well, right? So understanding what is really the problem here, right? And then understanding what the role of machine learning can be. And we, you know, we have developed quite an elaborate framework actually for how to do project scoping well, which, you know, on the first obvious question is, you know, is there a social good problem here, right? So I think that's one that's important to answer, because that's where we spend most of our time. Then is there data that can actually be used to solve this problem in a better way? And even understanding what data there is can take quite a bit of time, because people's concept of data is very different, right? So I always think of the example of the city of Amsterdam's data portal, which was making open data available for these kinds of use cases. And many years ago, when I first checked it, they had they were proudly proclaiming that they had all of the data on 911. Well, actually 112 services related to the brandweer, right? So basically the guys that fire the trucks. And what happened is that when you looked at the actual data, it was just a pivot table that said, you know, in this part of the city there was, you know, 55 alerts. In that part of the city there's 71. That's not data that you can use to solve a problem, right? At least not using machine learning in this case. So the second part, so first understand this is social good. To make sure that there's data that we can use to solve the problem. And then the third piece, which is really important, is this is actually a priority for the organization. You'd be surprised how often people say this is really interesting, but interesting is the enemy of important, right? So interesting is, oh, we'd like to know, but it's not the same if something is really important to them. So the second thing that we also try to spend a lot of time up front is, what's the action that the organization is going to take based on our prediction? And that is not an easy thing to get in an initial conversation. It really does require understanding how the organization operates, and that also influences how we think about the problem. So one example of this is we worked with the World Economic Forum and various satellite image providers to help predict where illegal fishing was taking place globally. And we basically tried to do this at the ship level, right? So you have a ship, a vessel, and it does some sort of things, and you can then predict whether it's doing something illegal related to fishing. And the action that the organization could take actually differs quite a lot, because you can rank these ships. Like a machine learning model will rank all of the vessels you're running through your model with their likelihood of being involved in illegal fishing. And that ranked list of vessels can be used in two ways. It can be used as a blacklist, so that ships at the top of the list, are the ones that maybe a Coast Guard should go and inspect. But it can also be used as a whitelist, right? So if I'm Target or Walmart and I'm sourcing fish from somewhere, I maybe want to make sure that I buy fish from organizations that are for sure not, or very unlikely to be involved in illegal fishing. So it comes back to the point here: understanding what the objective function is and what the action is that the organization is going to take affects how you train your model and optimize your model. Because if you're looking for blacklists or whitelists, and the types of predictions and models that you're going to try and choose are going to be different. The third piece, the third lesson that I want to highlight here is that the data we end up using has never been collected for our use case, right? That's a general lesson. So again, to take this World Economic Forum example, we use satellite imagery, as I mentioned. And most of the satellite imagery in the world is actually collected over land, because that's the data that can be sold. So satellite providers that were donating the data to us, a couple of big organizations that had basically the best satellite data out there, gave us all their data, access to all their data, and it was 95% land-based data. So if you're trying to use this for predicting illegal fishing, you need the ocean data. So thinking about this upfront and making sure that how you can work with imperfect data, because it's always going to be imperfect, and be creative about that is a key feature of doing this kind of work. The fourth lesson that I want to highlight here is that a lot of these organizations require, as I mentioned, training, education, learning about data science. But the same is true for us as data scientists when we work on their problem. We need to learn about their constituents. So when we did, this kind of work for the emergency services department, these are the ambulances for a city called Cincinnati in the United States. We actually spent 3 days riding along with the ambulances to understand, how was data collected, what's the problem that they face, what makes this difficult for us as data scientists to learn what the actual problem looks like. Because all this data, it's very easy to talk about data, but in the end, it represents the world. And it often the imperfections in the data, the mistakes, the omissions actually tell you something about how the world operates. And the last piece here, maybe I wanted to highlight, is that there's opportunities everywhere. As I started the presentation, we found that 7 years ago, when we started, there was an incredible number of areas and opportunities where data science could really improve, a lot of systems that are super important in our society. And, now in 2020, I think that is still the case, right? So if you think about doing this work, to any of you here, we need you, right? So we're continuously looking for volunteers to do this kind of work. And the only big change I've seen since the last 7 years is that there's many more organizations like ours doing that, and that's a great thing. So we partner with many organizations, and I'm glad to hear Andrew's story, because we need more of this teams doing this kind of work. So I think I'm out of time, and I promised to leave enough time for questions. So I'm going to stop it here and hand it over back to you, Emma or Anita.
Thank you very much. I don't have to do the policing, and that's great for me too. Yeah, it's extremely interesting. There is such a diversity of organization, and that could lead us to the question from Shiel. They ask, like, how do you decide when a cause is for good? You briefly mentioned that. And do you take different decisions depending on the organizations that you work with?
Yeah, great question. I think the short answer is it's a super subjective decision. The truth is we have enough organizations that reach out to us that we can always pick the top of our list, so we can stay away from the gray zone. Because there is of course a gray zone, but the things that you saw on the list are ones that we were basically always comfortable with in terms of social good, and as I mentioned, there's enough opportunity, so we can still do a lot of the obvious, at least obvious to us, good stuff, working with the social good partners before we start talking about the gray zone. But what's obvious to us is not obvious to others, so we do get hedge funds that apply to our program and say, hey, we've got a problem in allocating investments or something like that, and that's social good because it's market equilibrium, blah blah blah, and obviously that's not within our scope, right, of social good. So you wouldn't find hedge funds in a list of projects that we work for.
Yeah, that's. I want to ask you about the gray zone. Actually, would you like to talk a bit about it? So.
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm not sure we have time to really get to the depth of it, because it's as I mentioned, very subjective. And to be honest, I think what's actually much more interesting than the organization's gray zone is the gray zone within a specific project. So you always get these gray zones, which is like, okay, let's say the World Economic Forum blacklist, whitelist question, right? That to me is gray zone in a sense that, are you going to go give your list to a law enforcement agency like the Coast Guard, or are you going to give the list, the bottom of the list to somebody who's buying fish? And that surprisingly happens in every project. It's when you talk about ambulance response times and shortening them and optimizing those systems, you can imagine that these gray zones are always present, right? So if you try to optimize for response time and you have a shortage of ambulances, and there's different areas of the of the city, some of them are underserved, low income, we can name an infinite number of gray zones that will come up in any project, and those are much more interesting in a way, because that's where any of us working in this field, data scientists, actually have to make choices. If I can choose not to work with a cigarette company, and that's an easy choice for me from a data science for social good perspective. But what's much harder if I'm trying to help the emergency department of Cincinnati optimize their emergency services and do that in an equitable manner, because it's not about efficiency, right? Big difference when we're doing this kind of work versus working for a bank is that a bank is caring about efficiency, right? We care about equity and equality, right? And the government generally cares about equality and equity, right? And so how do you actually make sure that you define fairness, right, in a way that is actually equitable or more equal, depending on what the government or this organization wants to do. As I mentioned, this is a more complex topic, but generally we focus on organizations that we think have a direct impact on their constituents in any way, and that are underserved, right? So I see a question there from Giel. I think it's the tail of his question: do organizations pay? We have had organizations pay when they can, but it's not a criteria for our selection. So when the World Bank, works with us, they can contribute. But as you can imagine, a small educational district or a small NGO in Kenya does not have that kind of capacity. And the reason we started the organization is to help also those organizations, right? So and that's why we are actually fundraising a lot, and we're right now in a fundraising effort again. So any of you that know who we should talk to do raise funds, in fact, would be happy to get your suggestions, because those funders make it possible for us to work with all of the organizations that we think have social good type problems out there.
And in terms of fundraising, are you also looking into data raising? That leads to the question from Sandra. So do you consider collaboration with big tech companies and to access for more data, for instance? And or also, is it part of your collaboration with governmental institutions to have access to more data?
Yeah, we have explored it, as I mentioned. This World Economic Forum case or project we did is a good example of that. So we had Digital Globe and Spire, which are Planet Labs, which are providers of data, right? Some of them satellite data, others tracking data, donate data for the project with the World Economic Forum. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, in some cases, you do need that kind of data to do this kind of work. And we've gone out in the past and worked with organizations that have the data to be part of the solution or the project that we work on. But it's also, one of the considerations that like Andrew mentioned, I think they open source the projects. We do the same, right? So we open source all of the code. If you go to our GitHub, you can find, I think, 300 repositories of different projects that we've done, and that's out there, right? And so the idea is that anybody that has data could take the code and apply it. I mean, anybody here that's data scientist knows it's not that easy, but we try to at least provide the recipe and the code for people to get inspired and know that this is possible, right?
Okay, thanks. There is 2 more questions in the chat. And there's also a message that Andrew tried to send earlier. I don't think the participants had it, so I just posted it in the chat as well. So there's a question in terms of the skills that you're particularly looking for. Maybe you could answer that quickly, and we might have time for the last question.
Yeah, this is a good question. So we're looking for lots of skills. I did have a slide on that. We didn't get to it, but it's the obvious one is everything related to data science. So we of course need data science volunteers. That's also my my tribe, so to say, right? But actually, you'd be surprised what other help we need, right? So we need people that know about ethics and legal issues, experimental design, social sciences, people that understand basically how to communicate some of these issues. You'd be surprised how much how much work needs to be done still on actually designing experiments for these kind of situations. One thing is to develop a model. The other is to actually do an experiment in an ethical way, right? You can't just say, hey, I'm going to randomly give some of these ambulances a different direction, right? It doesn't work, right? You need to come up with a very safe yet statistically valid experimental design to test some of these machine learning models. And a lot of that work that comes from statistics is actually not useful, right? So people do random RCTs and stuff. It doesn't work in this case, right? You actually come up with ranked lists that prioritize a certain kind of government action. You need a completely different design than an RCT for that, right? And how do you experts in that field are people that we also need. So in that sense, we can use volunteers from a broad range of backgrounds. And that's always been the case, right? With data science alone, you can't solve all problems. So
I see. So we're past time, unless you're gonna stop me, I suppose.
Yeah, I might have to stop you. Sorry about that. It's really great that everyone is so engaging, but we are past time now. So I'm going to have to end the webinar here. But before I do that, I want to say a big thank you to you, Emma, for moderating this webinar. It's been great. And a big thank you to Paul and Andrew as well for these very enlightening presentations. They've been really, really useful and very, very interesting. And I guess to conclude, you can watch all of our previous webinars on our YouTube channel, which is just Amsterdam Data Science. So please have a look over there and subscribe to our channel. And for anyone that maybe missed the first part, you can watch that on YouTube as well. So thank you very much to all the speakers, and Emma, thank you very much. This was a great webinar. All right, that's it from us then. Bye-bye.